You are very enthusiastic about my lecture and are ready and poised for this. So I'm Dr. Caroline, you all know me, but before I start my lecture, I just want to give you one piece of advice regarding something else, if you don't mind, which is that I'll be seeing you for Ophthal and ENT in a few weeks now, from July 28th. It's only a one-day interaction and there are two parts, ENT and Ophthal. So I want you to read your workbooks and come, otherwise you'll find it quite overwhelming. So please read the book, see if you can answer the questions that are there in the workbook so that you come a bit more enlightened, let's put it that way. Okay, so I don't want you to say, oh, we didn't understand because it's only one day and then I don't meet you again, so we can't do a little refresher. Okay, that's the I wanted to announce it first, but then let's go on with the second lecture of today. I'm trying to make it very simple for you so that if you pay a little attention, then you won't have to read a lot and it'll be what you call second nature to you. Is that okay? Feel free to ask questions. Avoid asking in between if that's okay. And if I don't answer, I'll look the other way, probably towards Andrew. Where's Andrew gone? Yeah, he's there. So he'll help me with that. Now, I'm going to use the Buckingham Medical School provided slides, but I thought before we go on the slides, if you do a little background refresher, which you already know, and I might ask you, then it will help you build up on your pharmacology. So then the drugs will look very easy to you and you could not have to remember a lot. So we're going to do two things today. One is Parkinson's disease. So we are doing pharmacology of neurological disorders, movement disorders. We're covering two movement disorders. There are many, but we're covering two. One is Parkinson's disease and the other one is myasthenia gravis. Perfect. Okay, so we'll start off with Parkinson's disease because that's the bigger part of your chapter. Now, before I start, who is the big name that recently died who had Parkinson's? Perfect. So you already know everything. So I just have to add a few more things. Now we're going to start with anatomy. Now for that I need to draw a little diagram with your help. Okay. We'll cover physiology after that, just a few bit, a little bit of biochemistry so that you know what the mechanism of drugs are, where do the drugs act, a little bit about Parkinson itself, what are the signs and symptoms, and then the slides so that we cover the pharmacological drugs as well as the adverse drug reactions. Are you with me on that? So that is what we'll be mapping out. So let's start with anatomy. I should have brought some chocolates because that would have been a good reward sign, but I will write down your names and I'll be good to you when you come to the hospital just for one day. Okay, can you tell me, if you can, and that's team 1, team B and team C there, team A, B, C, what are the 5 nuclei of basal ganglia? So we'll start with team A. It doesn't include the teachers here. Do you know any nuclei in the basal ganglia? Have you covered basal ganglia? If not, perfect. Okay, so you have to interact with me because I don't know what you know, what you don't know. So you have to. Okay, so sketch diagrams. Sagittal section of the brain, okay, and then you have the corpus callosum in the between, the joining bridge. Are you with me on this, everyone? Yeah. Now there are cortical nuclei and then there are subcortical nuclei, okay, which is below the cortex. Now if I draw, and you can draw with me, something like a comma shaped, and I'll give you a few names that you have to remember. And that's very easy. Okay, this is known as the subcortical nuclei, also known as the striatum, ST or neo, which is new, striatum, STRI. Should I just write it down? Neo, STRIATUM, striatum. Yeah. So this is known as globus pallidus. I'm just writing GP. Then there is putamen, caudate nucleus. And then this is the amygdala. Okay, just remember that these are nuclei that are responsible for your limbic system as well as for your habitual movements, you know, the automatic, not autonomous, automatic movements. Okay, so this is the nuclei. Now there is your thalamus. Have you heard of thalamus? Yeah, so that's where your thalamus is. And then below the thalamus are some nuclei known as subthalamic nuclei. Make sense because they're below the thalamus, yeah. And then there's another set of nuclei known as substantia nigra. That's the anatomy that you have to know for Parkinson's disease. Okay? Anywhere you feel that you need me to enlighten you more, feel free. Okay? Now, all you have to remember is that there are some neurons which radiate to this nuclei, and there are some neurons that radiate to the cortex. So from this thingy is lying like that. Are you with me on that? This what I have drawn is lying like that, and the cortex, and then there is the cerebellum there. So it radiates there to the cortex as well as to the nuclei. Okay, and this tract, so this is substantia nigra. This tract will be known as what? Nigrostriatal tract. Make sense? Because this is known as the neostriatum. This is the substantia nigra. So the tract that goes from the substantia nigra to the neostriatum will be the nigrostriatal tract. Are you with me on this? Yeah? We have to build up a few building blocks, then it becomes very easy. So stay with me with this. Yeah? And these tracts, they are dopaminergic tracts. So they release dopamine when they reach the the basal ganglion nuclei. Okay? So if I have to draw a little sketch diagram, forget about this, another diagram. You have this neostriatum at the top, you have the substantia nigra, yeah, at the bottom, and you have a tract known as the striatonigral tract. Striatonigral tract. Are you with me on that, everyone? And this will release dopamine. Buzzword is the dopamine. Okay, and there are some other tracts here which release acetylcholine. Okay, there are tracts within the neostriatum, there are other tracts, they release acetylcholine. So if this dopamine, it inhibits this, and if this dopamine is not there, what will happen to the acetylcholine? It will get excitatory. Are you with me on that? So the dopamine puts the brakes on this acetylcholine release. If you get that, then we can start on the next one. Are you with me on that, everyone? At least half of you, before you lose every one of you. Okay, and that is the beginning of understanding of your Parkinson's disease. So in Parkinson's disease, what happens is there is depletion of your dopamine. So what would be the treatment logically for Parkinson's disease? If there are no dopamine, what do you have to give? You give dopamine. So that's the beginning of how you start your pharmacology. Okay, there are other things that we can do, but if I tell you that this is a seesaw, where on one side you have dopamine and on the other side you have acetylcholine, yeah, and it is very well balanced, yeah, because acetylcholine also stimulates GABA. Okay, so if my dopamine is not there, the acetylcholine will stimulate GABA. Are you with me on that? And GABA is what? Inhibitory neurotransmitter. So all your movements become less, and that's what happens in Parkinson's disease. Are you with me on that? To a certain extent? Yeah. So one of the things that I can do is, I just said that dopamine goes down in Parkinson's disease. We discussed that? Yeah. So what will happen is acetylcholine will go up, or it relatively looks like it has gone up because it's there. Are you with me on that? So one way we can improve that imbalance is by giving dopamine, or the other one is prevent acetylcholine forming too much, so decrease acetylcholine to get the balance back. So far so good? Okay, so that's your anatomy and physiology done. Okay, and then we move on one more thing, which was biochemistry. Remember that? Yeah, and then we'll go to the slides at the end. So we've done anatomy and physiology a little bit. We'll go on to biochemistry and we'll go to the little signs and symptoms of Parkinsonism. So if I have to give dopamine, then the question is, what does dopamine come from? How is dopamine made? So who has any idea on how dopamine is made? Tyrosine, well done, excellent. So tyrosine. So the next question is, how is tyrosine made? What does tyrosine come from? Sorry? Sorry? Yes, very good. An amino acid, which one? Excellent. Who said that? Well done. I'm very impressed. So tyrosine comes from phenylalanine. Okay? Not that it's important. What is important for you is tyrosine, but you have to know the whole pathway. So this is the biochemistry part of this lecture. So tyrosine gives you what? L-dopa. And then what does L-dopa give you? Dopamine. And then what happens to dopamine? It can, yes, so dopamine can form norepinephrine and epinephrine. But let's say if I have to metabolize dopamine, then what happens? Let's say dopamine breaks down rather than converting into more epinephrine and norepinephrine. So you are right. Let's make it like that: epinephrine and norepinephrine. That is if one amino acid gives rise to another one, gives rise to another one. Yeah. But let's say if I have to say that dopamine gets metabolized, it gets distracted. So my question to you is, what happens to that? Do you know what happens to dopamine once it gets metabolized? Yeah. So there are two enzymes that you have to remember. One is MAO-B, yeah, and the other one is COMT. So the chocolate question is, what is MAO-B and what is COMT? What's the full form? Not you. I'm not going to ask you, okay, because you know too much about this pharmacology. But anyone else? Monoamine oxidase. And why B? Beta. Okay. What is MAO-A then? Oh, well done. Okay. MAO-A metabolizes what and MAO-B metabolizes what? So MAO-A metabolizes epinephrine and serotonin, and MAO-B enzyme metabolizes dopamine. Are you with me on that? Okay. If you have MAO-A, yeah, and it metabolizes dopamine, you have a metabolite known as DOPAC, or dihydroxyphenyl acetic acid, if you have MAO-B as an enzyme that metabolizes dopamine. Or if you are using COMT, then you have something known as 3-O-methyl-tyramine. Just so that you know, and this is the biochemistry bit of it. Two things I want to know: what is the enzyme here and here? So what is the enzyme that converts tyrosine to L-dopa and dopa to, sorry? Yes. So tyrosine hydroxylase converts tyrosine to L-dopa, yeah, and L-dopa gets converted to dopamine by, perfect, decarboxylase, dopamine decarboxylase. So you know everything, so I don't have to say anything more in detail about this biochemistry. Now, you rightly said that in Parkinsonism you have a deficiency of dopamine, or you have, more importantly, an imbalance between dopamine and, perfect, well done, my work is done. So how do you define Parkinsonism? So that is the signs and symptoms of Parkinsonism. So how do you define Parkinsonism? It's a progressive, because initially you have some symptoms and then the symptoms get worsened, so it's progressive. Neurodegenerative. So that's the important buzzword here, neurodegenerative disease, which affects which system mainly? the motor, because most of the Parkinsonism you see the motor functions, isn't it, getting affected. So the buzzword, there are three buzzwords for Parkinson disease. It's a progressive, yeah, yes, yes. I want you to say yes back so that I get the acknowledgement that you are listening to me. Okay, so it's a progressive, neurodegenerative, yeah, affecting the motor function. Okay, predominantly. It also affects the cognitive function, it also affects the sensory, but they are less, but it does affect. Okay, are you with me?
Yes.
Thank you. Can I have it? Can I have a bit more enthusiasm? It will help me feel better. Okay, so that's Parkinsonism disease for you. Okay, now there are 4 cardinal features of Parkinsonism, and do you know those? In Parkinsonism, there are 4 features. If you have those, you think, okay, that seems like Parkinson. Or if somebody says, what are the 4 cardinal features, and if you know that, you'll be experts in that. Tremors. Okay, come on guys, quick, we have only 45 minutes left. Rigidity. Well done, bradykinesia. And sorry, and well done, and that's also known as, well done, ataxia. Okay, but postural instability is not wrong, and the reason I wrote it in this order is the way you want to remember it. Either you can remember it as BRAT, B-R-A-T, or if you watch too much animation, BART. Whatever way you remember these are the 4 cardinal features of Parkinson's disease. Okay, now that you have said these, we'll act a little bit more better by giving it a few more things. What type of rigidity is classical of Parkinsonism? What? Cogwheel rigidity. And there are 2 words only I need. If you remember those 2 words, then you'll be like experts in Parkinsonism, or at least you'll be living in a delusion that you're experts in Parkinsonism. Okay, so what are those words? Cogwheel, and the other one is lead pipe. Remember this, Parkinsonism you will have to learn for your 2nd MBBS, 3rd MBBS, 4th MBBS. You'll have to remember, if you go into medicine, you'll have to remember in any other fields you go, Parkinson will come across you, surgery, medicine, whatever you. So these are the 2 types of common rigidity you have. What is cogwheel rigidity? You have what you call, when you are resting, your muscles go into rigidity, and when you try to extend your hand, there is a staccato movement, like a ratchet. So that's cogwheel. Lead pipe is when it's a bit more smoother. Are you with me on that? So classical rigidity is known as cogwheel and lead pipe. What's the ataxia or postural instability? That's there. It's known as a what type of gait? Shuffling gait. Well done. Who said that? Well done. Shuffling gait. So that buzzword here is shuffling gait. Okay. And then tremors. What's the buzzword for tremors? Come on guys. Pill rolling. Why is it known as pill rolling? You are rolling a pill because in the good old days they used to make pills by rolling them. Are you with me on that? Yeah. So it's known as pill rolling. Okay. By the way, why it's known as Parkinson's disease? You're reading about it, so you should know about why is it named as Parkinson's.
Man.
Yes, a man. It could be a woman. Yeah. So James Parkinson wrote an essay on Parkinson's disease. Okay, and that's how it got a name. It was there before he wrote that, but he was the first one who's been credited with that, and therefore the name has put. It's also known as paralytical agitance, in case you come across the terminology. Okay, so we've done that. I don't want to stay on too much about the features, but these are the features, and so the drugs that we use are mainly because we want to treat bradykinesia and rigidity. We also want to treat the tremors. Okay. Now these are all known as what symptoms? Motor symptoms. So what I'll be discussing today are all the drugs that we use to treat the motor symptoms, which is bradykinesia, rigidity, ataxia and tremors. Ataxia less, tremors and the bradykinesia and rigidity more. Are you with me on that? And there are what are the other symptoms, because I don't want you to forget there are sensory symptoms and there are cognitive symptoms. So you have memory loss as well as you have delusions and other things. Are you with me on that? Okay. So that's where we end our signs and symptoms, and then we finally move on to our pharmacology. Okay. And when we move on to pharmacology, I want you to keep your mind open that there are two sets of drugs that you have to remember in classification. One is dopamine type drugs and one are acetylcholine inhibitor type drugs. Are you with me on that? So now when you have dopamine type drugs, yeah, this is the neuron, axon and the synapse there, and then there is another neuron that going below that. Yeah, what's can you see back at that drawing? Yeah, you can see what I've drawn. No, I'll draw it on the next page for you. I'm a very good artist, so I can draw it anyway. Okay, so you have the neuron, axon, the synapse, and then you have another neuron. Are you with me on this? Okay, and then what are there on this? Receptors. So we are considering the dopamine system right now. So this is the dopamine neuron, and then these are the dopamine receptors. So to increase dopamine, I can give dopamine, yeah, and they are known as dopamine precursors, because instead of giving dopamine directly, which I can't because it will get metabolized, I give something which is one step before, which will then cross the blood-brain barrier and then can convert it into dopamine. Are you with me on it, everyone? So we can't give dopamine directly. We can't even give tyrosine directly because they all get, there's a rate limiting step known as tyrosine hydroxylase. So what we can give is L-dopa, which will then go across to the blood-brain barrier and then convert to dopamine. So, and these are known as dopamine precursors. Okay, and there's another drug that will come across known as carbidopa, and I'll tell you that when we come across that. So those are known as dopamine precursors. So either I can give something which is making dopamine, or I can give something which mimics dopamine. Are you with me on that? And that is known as dopamine agonist. Okay, dopamine agonists. Okay, third thing I can give is drugs that will inhibit or that will prevent dopamine getting metabolized. Are you with me on that? So the drug that we just discussed when we drew this diagram, so we had MAO and COMT enzymes which were going to metabolize dopamine. So we'll classify them into one heading which is known as inhibitors. Okay, and then we'll subclassify as MAO inhibitors or MAO B inhibitors, because you are very perfect. So MAO B inhibitors and COMT inhibitors. Are you with me on that? So we have now, just to summarize, three classes of drugs under the dopamine umbrella. Dopamine precursors, so we are giving more dopamine. We are giving something which mimic dopamine. They are not dopamine, but they mimic dopamine, so they are known as dopamine agonists because they will act on the same receptors and work like dopamine. And the third thing is inhibitors, which are MAO B inhibitors and COMT inhibitors. And the fourth one is dopamine facilitators. It's not very commonly used, but just remember one example, amantadine. Okay, which is, it just facilitates. Nobody knows how it works, but it facilitates dopamine. So amantadine, it's an antiviral drug. So these are the four drugs classification under the dopamine umbrella, and under the acetylcholine inhibitor umbrella there is just one or two which will do that. So now you can relax and we'll go on the slides, and those who want to go into snooze mode, don't do. Okay, thanks a lot for your patience. Do you want a little 1 minute break, or you're happy for me to continue? Because I thought this background was needed for us to do the slides, and then we can go quicker. Yeah, so let's do that. So what we are doing today is idiopathic Parkinson disease and myasthenia gravis. Okay, these are the two drugs, the pharmacology we are discussing. Why idiopathic? Sorry, there are other causes of Parkinson's. Yeah, so that's why we are not discussing the other causes of Parkinson, we are discussing the idiopathic one. What are the other causes, since you know so much? Why do you think Parkinson can happen apart from being the idiopathic cause? Anyone? Drugs. Well done. Which drug? Just give me one example. Haloperidol. Yeah, so antipsychotic drugs can cause anti-Parkinson. Well done. Just so that you find this talk a little interesting, have you heard of Vietnam War? Have you heard of Agent Orange? Yeah, so that was one of the causes that caused Parkinsonism. Okay, so that's one drug done. What's the other cause of Parkinsonism which is not idiopathic? Very quickly. Come on. So drugs is one. Thank you. Third. Inflammation and encephalitis can also cause Parkinsonism. Okay, just remember 3 causes so that you know. Everything you discuss, have 5 points in your fingertips, okay, about everything that you learn. Okay, so that's done. And then we discussed this already. It's a neurodegenerative disorder, you know that. It's a progressive clinical course, we know that. Motor symptoms, we know that. And there are also non-motor symptoms. So when you're discussing Parkinsonism, just don't say brat or BART. Also say that there's got cognitive dysfunction, they got sensory dysfunction. Are you with me on that? Yeah. So what are the clinical features? We discussed that. Bradykinesia, rigidity, tremor, postural instability. Low dopamine is the cause, and disturbance with other neurotransmitter. What is the other neurotransmitter? Acetylcholine. And the emphasis is on low dopamine. Okay. Non-motor manifestation, very important that you remember these few as well. You have mood changes, you have pain, cognitive change, urinary symptoms, sleep disorders, and sweating. One of the things that you remember is the facial expressions disappear as the disease progresses, and the buzzword for that is you have a mask-like face in Parkinsonism. Okay, so remember that. This is how there's a 15-year follow-up for prognosis in Parkinson, that 94% will have dyskinesia. So akinesia is no movement, but you do have some movement, but it is less. So that is known as bradykinesia, or you have abnormal movements, so that's dyskinesia. 81% will have falls, there will be a cognitive decline in 84%. Somnolence and swallowing difficulty, which are the non-motor functions, will also get impeded in 80 and 50%, and you'll have serious speech problems. So what are the clinical features? You have to exclude the other causes of Parkinsonisms. There is drug induced, we discussed that. There's a vascular one, and then progressive supranuclear palsy and multiple system atrophy also mimic Parkinsonism. So you have to be careful about making sure that you have excluded those before you diagnose them as idiopathic Parkinsonism and corticobasal degeneration. One way of knowing is give the medications for Parkinsonism, and if they get better, that's another way of knowing whether the response to treatment is there. You do clinical diagnosis is the mainstay, and then you also do some imaging. What is SPECT and PET? So you do some radiological. So I just want to know whether you know SPECT and PET, and if you can tell me what they are. Anyone? Should I start giving you some wages, then would you answer? What does SPECT stand for? Because without knowing these terminologies, there's no point, because you then be learning by rote, isn't it? So what the simple PET is what? Positive emission tomography. It's like a CT scan. Okay, and what is SPECT? Single photon emission computerized tomography. So that's also there. These are 2 different types, but the SPECT one is the one that they use commonly to diagnose Parkinsonism. Okay, we will come to that test in a minute. One thing that I did not touch was pathology. I should have, but I didn't, and I forgot. But now, luckily, because of the slides, we can. The buzzword for pathology, if you don't remember anything about Parkinsonism, you have to remember this word, Lewy bodies. Yeah? So the buzzword is Lewy bodies. It's essentially these, which are proteins which are there in the cells that are dying, and as the cells die, these aggregates are seen when you do histopathology. Can we diagnose patients with Parkinsonism with these Lewy bodies? Yes, we can, but after they die. Okay, so it's a post-mortem diagnosis, because you can't do it before that. There is loss of pigment, there is increased turnover, and the symptoms will only appear if you have the loss of pigment, and if there is a 50% or more loss of the nerves get degenerated more than 50%. It's more towards the 70% mark, but once it goes above the 50, you start seeing subtle changes. And one of the first changes that happen is handwriting. Okay, you'll see the tremors coming there in the handwriting, and it's also known as micrographia. The words also become smaller. So not only are the words smaller, they are very what you call it, there's a lot of vibratory, they're not very clear cut words. Okay, so there is upregulation of receptor, and there is reduced dopamine. Okay, so Lewy bodies is the one that I want you to remember. Neurodegeneration is the other buzzword you remember. And this is coronal section that they have taken, globus pallidum, the excitatory and the inhibitory centers, the striatum, and then substantia nigra at the bottom. So what you have to remember is substantia nigra is at the bottom, and the neostriatum is at the top, and it's the pathways which are connecting them which have got degenerated. So this is the one that I drew before. I'm just going to emphasize it once again. You have substantia nigra at the bottom, you have neostriatum at the top, and you have these neurons which are made up of, which have dopamine in it, which are inhibitory to the acetylcholine. Okay, and what are acetylcholine? They stimulate the GABA. Yeah, so if you inhibit acetylcholine, acetylcholine cannot inhibit GABA, so GABA works. GABA doesn't get stimulated, so you have movement. But because this work isn't working, acetylcholine is excitatory, it stimulates GABA, GABA is inhibitory, so you have paucity of movement. Are you with me on that? Thank you. Okay, so you have loss of neurons, you have loss of inhibition of neostriatum, and then you have a chain of abnormal signaling. Are you with me? Because I've been going at breakneck speed. Are you okay? Should we continue? Yeah? Okay, well done. You don't have to remember this. It's this more of the same that I said, but essentially what you have to remember is these are the excitatory, the blue ones are the excitatory neurons which are going from substantia nigra not only to the basal ganglia but also, or the striatum, but also to the neocortex, and also to the motor and premotor cortex, as well as to the supplementary cortex. And you can see that there are stimulatory as well as inhibitory neurotransmitters in the circuitry. Are you with me on that? Yeah, perfect. You don't have to. This is the dopamine molecule in 3D, and this we have already alluded to. Tyrosine, important enzyme to remember, tyrosine hydroxylase gets converted to L-DOPA. L-DOPA, very important, with the help of DOPA decarboxylase. So just remember this as DDC, dopamine decarboxylase will convert to dopamine. Dopamine gets to norepinephrine and epinephrine. Yeah, and that was the metabolism of dopamine that we have discussed. You can either have MAO at the first stage, MAO B, and you will have, this is also known as DOPAC, DOPAC, or you will have catechol O methyl transferase, and you will have 3-methoxytyramine, depending on which one acts on it first, and eventually they both metabolize further to become homovanillic acid, or HVA, homovanillic acid. You see, monoamine works at the first stage, catecholamine transfers works at the second stage, catecholamine works at the first stage, monoamine oxidase works at the second stage. So this is the metabolism that you need to remember. So if I don't want dopamine to get metabolized, because I want dopamine to be there at the nerve centers where I want it to be, I either take a catecholamine methyl transferase inhibitor as my drug, or I take monoamine oxidase as my drug inhibitor. Are you with me on that? Yeah? Perfect. Well done. Neurons and neurotransmitter, essentially, not to ruminate on it too much, but if you look at this, the neurons are synthesized, they are transported to the base of the axon, they are released in the synaptic cleft, they act at the receptors, and then some of them get reabsorbed into the vesicles and get stored there to be released further whenever they are stimulated. And that is what we do in surgery when we use something known as, which is very more commonplace now, deep brain stimulation. We put some electrodes there, yeah, and we know that there are storage vesicles there. We stimulate it, the storage vesicle releases dopamine, the patient's symptoms improve. Are you with me on that? Make sense to you all? Yeah? One caveat you have to remember: all your drugs will work if the nerves are still alive and they still have the ability to make dopamine. If the cells have died, which they will over the course of the disease, then even if you give these drugs, it won't work. Yeah? So, DAT scan. This is one way in which you can give a radioactive drug to the patient, use a gamma camera to see whether they have been uptaken by the dopamine transporters, and then have a scan like that. So it is abnormal in PD. So what you are supposed to see, and I won't tell you too much detail, but I presume you can see that there are some yellow and red spots, yeah? And just to make it a bit more easy for you, I promise I won't use any more, and you won't have to cut any more trees. This is my last one. If you think of it as a comma and a little curve, can you see this like that? A comma and a curve, yeah? So this one is there, which is based in normal people. So what you do is you give a radio isotope, ilophane 123 it's known as, but you don't have to remember that. You give it to that and then you look it in the camera and you'll see a scan like that, which is like a comma and it's known as a period and a comma, a full stop and a comma, yeah? But here you don't see the red in between, and also you see a little gap in between. Are you with me on that? Yeah? So you do this, then you give the patient dopamine agonists, and again the picture will shift back here. So you would know that that would be the reason why this patient is having a problem. And why is it known as DAT scan? The DA stands for dopamine, T stands for transporter. So scan, this is known as dopamine transporter scan, because this radioactive drug that you give gets absorbed and it travels along with the dopamine protein and gets synthesized as dopamine and gets mixed with dopamine. That's why we know that that is a scan that we use for dopamine DAT testing. Treatment, essentially we are for movement disorders and for non-motor features. We are not going to discuss a lot about non-motor features. I said in the beginning we'll do more of movement disorders. Neuroprotection, we just alluded to surgery a little bit. Deep brain stimulation is what they do in surgery. So levodopa is our main drug. That's under the dopamine umbrella. Now dopamine, we just said, doesn't work because it gets metabolized. And what we then do is we go one step above, which is L-dopa, and give it to the patient. What happens to 90% to 98% of the drug is it gets metabolized by the intestine. Okay. 10% will go into the blood, and 9% of that 10% will get metabolized. 7 to 10%. So in the end, essentially what remains is 1 to 3%, and that will cross the blood-brain barrier. That L-dopa will then get converted to dopamine, and then you will have improvement of symptoms. Are you with me on that? So if I want more L-dopa to go inside and cross the blood-brain barrier, what do? One is I can give more L-dopa, but again only 1 to 3% of it will go. Yeah. The other thing what I can do is the metabolism of L-DOPA which happens in the blood, not in the intestine but more in the blood, I can prevent that metabolism to occur, and I can use another 2-3% and therefore it will go. So just to make it a bit more simpler for you, if you have not understood, this is the blood-brain barrier. It's blood-brain barrier. I give L-DOPA 1 to 3% crosses, and then it forms dopamine. Are you with me on that? And 70 to 97% gets metabolized. Yeah. If I can some way have another drug here which will decrease the metabolism of L-DOPA to dopamine, so that more L-DOPA is there, then more will go there. Are you with me on that? And that drug is carbidopa. Okay. Also there's another drug known as benzesurgide. So what we normally do is we don't give L-DOPA, because L-DOPA, if you give, you have to give a lot of L-DOPA, and then you'll have lots of side effects. So to decrease the side effect, I mix it up with another drug such as carbidopa, which will prevent the metabolism in the intestine and the blood, so that the L-DOPA can go more across. Are you with me on that? So even a small amount more amount of it will go. So that's what is shown in that slide, which is that L-DOPA crosses with active transport, dopamine cannot cross because of the blood-brain barrier, and then L-DOPA gets converted to dopamine, and this slide is a little wrong. Dopamine doesn't form MAO, dopamine doesn't form COMT. These are the enzymes that will metabolize dopamine and COMT. Are you with me on that? Okay. So L-DOPA must be taken up by dopaminergic cells in the substantia nigra and get converted to dopamine. And if fewer cells remain, it's a less reliable effect. It's a very busy slide. All you have to remember in this slide is what I have just spoken to you. Okay. L-DOPA is the most important drug that you have to know, apart from other few things, but this is the most important one. So just pay attention for another 5-10 minutes. Oral administration, so very good. Hopefully there will be more patient compliance. It's absorbed by active transport, that's the buzzword there, and you have to remember that 90% gets inactivated by the intestines or the intestinal wall because of the enzymes that are present in the intestinal wall. What are the enzymes that are present in the intestinal wall? MAO-B. Okay. Half-life is only 2 hours, so they work only for a short time, and therefore you have a short dose interval, and there is this fluctuation in blood levels and symptoms. 9% get converted to dopamine peripheral tissues. So although intestine destroy 90%, the remaining 10% that goes into the peripheral tissue, 9% gets converted to dopamine. So what is remaining is only 1%. Are you with me on that? Sometimes 1 to 3%, and less than 1% enters CNS, and that is the drug that we are using for our benefit or for our patient's benefit. Okay. Again, you have to remember that it competes with amino acid for that active transport. Remember, the L-DOPA going inside the central nervous system through a blood-brain barrier is an active transport process. Okay. And formulations, so 2 drugs names you have to remember if you can: Sinemet and Medopa. One is with carbidopa, which is levodopa plus carbidopa. The other one is beneldopa, which is L-DOPA with benzesurgide. Okay, so those are the 2 drugs, as a result of which you need reduced drug, because you need less L-DOPA and you have reduced side effects. So that's the advantage. It's the same thing they're saying. You have this peripheral DOPA, decarboxylase inhibitor. So you have L-DOPA that needs to go across, yeah, and the thing that prevents it is decarboxylase. So if you have a peripheral DOPA decarboxylase inhibitor, then what will happen is more will go. Are you with me on that? And that drug is carbidopa. L-DOPA gets metabolized in the gut and peripheries. Remember that, gut and peripheries. Formulations, standard doses, control release, preparation, and dispersible, because it's not soluble. Medopa. What is the advantage of L-DOPA? It's very effective, like for like. You have less dopamine, you get dopamine. you have side effects, nausea, anorexia. So what do you think dopamine acts on? What couple of systems do they act on? They act on mainly cardiovascular, they act mainly on central nervous system, because that's where dopamine receptors are present, and it acts also on one other center. Do you know what that center? Have you heard of CTZ? Okay. New term for you. So dopamine will act on many places, but essentially it will act on the heart and the blood vessels. Are you with me on that? Say yes. Yes. Thank you. So it will act on heart and blood vessels. It will also act on CNS, and it will also act on something known as CTZ, which is chemoreceptor trigger zone, and that is responsible for your vomiting and nausea. So that's why if I give more and more L-DOPA, it will act on the CTZ and it will cause you to have nausea and anorexia. It also responsible for hypertension. Why? Dopamine does have a vasodilatory effect, and therefore you might have orthostatic hypertension and psychosis and tachycardia. Disadvantage, you need an enzyme for conversion. From L-DOPA, it needs to be converted to DOPA. Long term, you lose the effect because of tachyphylaxis, and also the dopamine receptor the dopamine nerves keep on going down. You do have involuntary movements, so you have lots of dyskinesia, and we'll come to that in a minute, and you have some motor complication. On-off symptom is very common. So what happens is you give the drug, the patient improves. Sometimes he improves so much that he has involuntary extra activity, that is known as the on, and then the drug wears off, and then he suddenly becomes bradykinetic, and that's known as an off. So you keep on having these on-off symptoms. It wears off, you have dyskinesia, which are abnormal movements, and you also have dystonia. Freezing is when they suddenly stop moving or become immobile. It's an extreme form of bradykinesia. Interaction. For this purpose of L-DOPA, remember vitamin B6 will increase the peripheral breakdown of L-DOPA. So L-DOPA, you have 90% metabolized in the gut, 9 to 10% metabolized by the peripheries, and vitamin B6 will help or will metabolize it even more. So there will be less available to cross the blood-brain barrier. And MAO inhibitors, they risk hypertensive crisis. So there's something known as a cheese reaction or something known as a tyramine reaction. Won't go into detail much, but just let you know that if you have MAO inhibitors given to a patient and you give them L-DOPA, suddenly there's too much excitatory neurons in the system because you have two drugs. So you have something known as your blood pressure goes up, you become too excited, you have a lot of symptoms, excitatory symptoms. And many antipsychotic drugs block dopamine receptors, and Parkinsonism is a side effect. So when you said antipsychotic drug is a cause of Parkinsonism, you were right about that. So we discussed L-DOPA. We'll very quickly do two types, which is dopamine receptor agonist and MAO, or other inhibitors, which are of two types, MAO and COMT. Are you still with me, or you want to breathe for 1 minute? Can I go ahead? You are very patient, you are very good. If you want, we can all go for a drink, in brackets cold, not beer or anything like that, because I think you have practicals after this. So thank you for your patience, but I know it's been a long day for you, but I do want you to know about this so that you don't have to read too much in detail later. Dopamine receptor agonist, there are two types, ergot and non-ergot types. We don't use ergot types, so thank God for that. You can forget about that. What used to happen with them, and bromocriptine and pergolide is a common example, you used to have cardiac fibrosis. ADRs, you will read them a lot more, are adverse drug reactions. And then the non-ergot types are ropinirole and pramipexole, and patch, this is the one that they use very commonly. Rotigotine, this is the one that they use very commonly. Apomorphine is not that used, but it is one of the last resort drugs which is given subcutaneously. It can be given as a add-on therapy, so you can give L-DOPA as well as dopamine receptor agonist, or it can be given by itself. Nowadays more and more GPs start off with dopamine receptor agonist and then they add L-DOPA. Apomorphine is only for last resort type drugs, and these are mostly for patients with severe motor fluctuations. Advantages: they act directly and they have less dyskinesia and motor complication, which is a good thing, because with L-DOPA you sometimes don't know and you have more motor complication. Disadvantages: less efficacy than L-DOPA, but it also has got psychiatric, and it's also dose limited, so you can't keep on giving more and more, and it's very expensive, so that's a disadvantage. Impulse control disorder is another thing that I want to discuss with dopamine agonist. You have, if you give this dopamine agonist, you have something known as dopamine dysregulation syndrome. You have this habit which is like pathological gambling, hypersexuality, compulsive shopping, desire to decrease dosing. There's also the only thing I can comment on hypersexuality is, you must have heard of the term dirty old man, and that's what happens. Or you must have seen these flashes in the old age, and that's what happens if they are on these drugs. They don't realize they're doing it. So that's something that you have to keep in mind if you're sitting in your GP surgery and you have patients coming to like that. Also, does anyone know what the last word is? Pending. So these, just remember a few common manifestations of impulse control disorder. Pending is essentially a stereotactic movement which is very repetitive and it's not purposeful. So you must have seen some people keep cards one after the other without any purpose, then they remove the cards and then start keeping it again, and they keep on doing the same repetition the whole day without any purpose. Okay, many of us do it, but we are not Parkinson call, okay, and we are not on drugs, but we do it purposefully or just to waste time. But this is a very common symptom if you have impulse control disorder in patients whom you give dopamine agonists. Okay, dopamine receptor agonist side effects: sedation, hallucination, confusion, nausea, and hypertension. This you'll have to learn by heart. I can't say anything more about it. And then we come up to the inhibitors, the MAO-B inhibitors. So that is monoamine oxidase inhibitors type B, and again it metabolizes dopamine. So if you give inhibitors, so monoamine oxidase metabolizes dopamine, it predominates in dopamine containing regions, and MAO-B inhibitors will enhance dopamine. And the classic example is salicylic, the first one. It can be used alone, but mostly they are used as adjuncts, and they sort of smooth out the motor responses, and it may be neuroprotective. COMT is catechol-O-methyl transferase inhibitors. Again, what happens with catechol-O-methyl transferase inhibitors? There are two types, entacapone and tolcapone. Crosses blood-brain barrier, but main effect is peripheral. They monitor liver. You have to monitor liver functions. You can have raised LFTs with that, and essentially what they do is L-DOPA breaks down in the periphery to 3-O-methyl-DOPA, and then this 3-O-methyl-DOPA will compete with L-DOPA to enter by active transport across the blood-brain barrier. So if you have these COMT, then this is this conversion from L-DOPA to 3-O-methyl-DOPA doesn't happen, so more of L-DOPA goes across. Are you with me on that? Yeah? You didn't say yes or no, so I'm going to repeat it again. No, okay. Have no therapeutic effect, prolongs motor response. I have 5 more minutes, so I'm hoping to finish everything very quickly. And that is what I was trying to show you, that you have L-DOPA which can enter, and if you have COMT inhibitors, there will be more which will go down. Anticholinergics, last but not the least, acetylcholine may have an antagonist effect. There are these 3 types: procyclidine, orphanadrine, and trihexyphenidyl, and they have a very minor role in PD. Advantages: they treat tremors better. So if you have a patient with Parkinsonism who got more tremors, sometimes anticholinergics are used more than the L-DOPA, but they have no effect on bradykinesia. So what you have to remember is, if it is bradykinesia or rigidity, you use L-DOPA. If you have tremors, you use anticholinergics. As a rule of thumb, it's not absolute. And then last but not the least is that antiviral drug amantadine, and its mechanism is uncertain and it's very poorly effective and very few side effects, but it has got a little effect on tremors. And then surgery, we discussed it about. There are essentially, what you have to remember is that thalamus is responsible for tremors, and globus pallidus, which is the neostriatum, is responsible for dyskinesis. So depending on what you want to do, if you have a patient who's got problems with dyskinesia, you can do a globus pallidus surgery, or you can do a thalamotomy for tremors. And deep brain stimulation is for the subthalamic nucleus stimulation, so that more and more dopamine gets. And there's a little algorithm which has not come out clear on this, but essentially, if you think the patient has got Parkinsonism, you can either give them L-DOPA or you can give them dopamine agonist. If the motor complications develop, which are very common with L-DOPA, then you consider giving dopamine agonist, and then if still there are some complication, you think of apomorphine, remember, or surgery. Okay, this is an algorithm if you want to, nice guidelines, it's all on your slides. So I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to, in the last 5 minutes, go to myasthenia gravis. Important thing for you to remember is myasthenia gravis is when there is an antibody that acts against the receptor. So when you have acetylcholine trying to act on the acetylcholine receptor, this antibody prevents that. And so initially you have some activity, but over the course of the day the activity keeps on going down. And what does it affect? Mainly the ocular muscles, yeah, it affects the breathing muscles, it affects the bulbar muscles, and it affects the limb activity. Okay, so what if you know that this is the antibody that is causing the problem, you can do plasmapheresis, which will remove the antibody. Is that okay? Second, you can increase the acetylcholine in the neuromuscular junction by giving them drugs that will prevent their metabolism. Are you with me on that? So that more acetylcholine will stay here. Yeah, so that these are one of the two ways. Third thing you can also do is give them some steroids so that the antibody formation is less. 3 ways you remember. There's a fourth one, but remember the 3 ways. Okay, you can give them some immunosuppressants as well. So if you look at this gentleman here, you can see the ocular symptoms are very predominantly there, and you can see that over the course of the day he's getting more and more ptosis or lid lack. Yeah, they are the commonest presentation, but more importantly for an ITU perspective, you are worried if there is a bulbar involvement, because they can have not only dysphagia, dysphonia and dysarthria, but they may also have respiratory muscle involvement, and they may not be able to breathe and not be able to protect the airway, and also if there are limb weakness. These are the drugs that will exacerbate myasthenia gravis, and it often comes as an MCQ question. So if you remember a few of those drugs, from an anesthetic point of view, for me, aminoglycosides, because the surgeon often tells me to give gentamicin, beta blockers if the patient is already on them, succinylcholine because I do give them to paralyze the patient, and magnesium. So remember these drugs that may exaggerate myasthenia gravis. So why am I worried? Because if I give these drugs to a patient who's got myasthenia gravis, I will cause him more problems, and then the recovery from my anesthesia or recovery from his symptoms will be very much delayed. What are the complications? So you have a patient who's got myasthenia gravis, and the essence of the myasthenia gravis is that there is an antibody against the acetylcholine receptor. Are you with me on that? Yeah. So if I give him drugs to improve his myasthenia gravis, there is always a danger that the symptoms, the drugs act more than they are supposed to act, and the patient has what you call it over treatment and something known as more acetylcholine in the myoneural junction. So you have cholinergic crisis. Or the other thing is that I don't give any drugs and his symptoms get worse and worse, and he goes into the other way, myasthenic crisis. Self-explanatory. Are you with me on that? Yeah, okay. So what we can do, how do we treat? We give them acetylcholine acetylcholine esters, which is an enzyme which breaks down acetylcholine, you inhibit them. So there will be more acetylcholine in that in the neuromuscular junction. You can give them steroids